India's economy shrinks in the year 2020-21, minus 7.3%. The industry is worried. FICCI says general pessimism about economic prospects in the country. Two-week death count trend dips, but deaths in Kerala, Tamil Nadu still rising sharply. Top court questions a dual price for vaccines. Why should states pay a higher price? There must be one nation, one price. Centre must take responsibility for that, says the top court. Mamata accuses Prime Minister of vendetta. No-show by topmost Bengal official to Centre's order. Centre action against Chief Secretary likely. Supreme Court says time to define sedition. Parameters of sedition, etc. require interpretation, and the right of media to communicate news, even if critical of the regime, anywhere in India should be maintained. The Delhi High Court says Central Vista essential, work to continue as government says false narrative has been built around the Central Vista project. Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV 24/7. I'm Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor. Let's begin with the economic indicators at this point. India's economy, it shrunk in the year 2020-21, minus 7.3%. So much so that even the industry at this point is saying this is unprecedented. Look at that graph over there. Right from 2012 onwards, it has never been this bad. It has come down to minus 7.3. But if you look at only the Q4 results, it actually shows that it's up by 1.6%. Q3 revised upwards as well to 0.4%. And only 2 of the 8 sectors that were talked about have shown growth. Agriculture, for example, 3.1% versus 4.5%. Mining, minus 5.7% versus 4.4%. Manufacturing, 6.9% versus 1.7%. And those are the details at this point. Manufacturing looking at as the only silver lining at the moment.
Well, that's the most important part, and I think a lot of points were stressed by the Chief Economic Advisor in his presentation about the second wave, where he said it has the rise has been as steep as well as the decline has also been pretty steep. So that's the silver lining in that, of course. But using Google, using various other projections, including e-way bills, saying that the economy has definitely been hit in April and May. We'll have to wait and see what will be in terms of groceries and various other FMCGs, how things will turn up in terms of a revival in the economy. So that's something that needs to be taken note of. 2 important points. One, of course, that you need to increase the pace of vaccination. The second and the most important is to continue fiscal and monetary efforts, something that which has been reflected by traders, by the CII, by all business houses, that the government needs to do much more in terms of fiscal and monetary policy to ensure that India is able to cushion this second wave that has taken place. Yes, the numbers are dismal. It's 0.73, the worst ever I can think of probably in the last 40 years or so. And of course, the silver lining is that the agriculture has done well. So we'll have to wait and see how agriculture does in this present year. There has been, despite the farmers' protests, an increase, and it's in this context that we will have to wait and listen to experts and watch how the economy opens up, because that's key to India's growth targets. And if India has to fight and handle the pandemic, it also needs to be able to have some growth in place.
In fact, the industry's body, FICCI, also gave out a blunt warning today, even before those figures actually were released, saying there is general pessimism about the economic prospects in the country. Overall business confidence is nosediving, and that business confidence index has also fallen Earlier it was 74.2, now 51.5. Outlook on profits over the next 6 months also deteriorates, and 80% facing issues amidst localized lockdowns as well. The top concern, however, at this point remains to be weak demand and consumer sentiment. Manpower shortage also being underlined by FICCI. And all this is a fallout of COVID. Let's give you a quick wrap on those figures now. Cases in the past 24 hours, they have seen a downtrend of 7.7%. Deaths also see a downtrend at this point, down by 9.6%. Tests also down 18.5%. And positivity rate, well, that's down as well, 9.07%. But while all of this is good news, vaccination remains to be a worry, because look at that figure over there. Vaccination down 66.4% at this point. Well, some would say this is the Sunday factor, but many others continue to point out that this is the only way we can actually get out of the pandemic. But let's look at the worrying figure there, and it is not just the vaccines, but also of deaths. Of the 54,710 deaths in the last 2 weeks alone, we see while an overall downward trend in the number of deaths in the country, but if you look at this 2-week average, you will see that there are certain states which continue to show a rising trend. We mark that out in red for you. In the last 2 weeks, 3 of every 4 deaths happened in these states. And overall in India, we saw states like Tamil Nadu, and we also saw states like Kerala continuing to show very high uptake on the death figure. And vaccines, the only way forward, right? Well, that came under question by the Supreme Court as well, the policy that is. The government on Monday faced some very severe, tough questions about the COVID vaccination policy, which the Supreme Court flagging various flaws in an inoculation drive, criticized for differential pricing as well, shortage of doses, lack of access from rural areas of the country as well. In fact, it went on to say, and I quote now, that our arms are strong enough to come down on the government. If the purpose is to procure vaccines, why centre should procure only for 45 and above of age? It went on to say, why are the states paying a higher price? Whose responsibility is it that countries should have one nation, one pricing after all? To this, the centre actually responded, saying that their policy at the moment is not cast in stone and that it remains to be dynamic. Also, interestingly adding that if vaccination, the centre says, opened for all, then it will be overcrowding. In fact, the centre there has been given 2 weeks time to respond to all those very pertinent questions being asked by the Supreme Court. But also in Supreme Court came another very important issue today. The word is sedition. The use and abuse of this word legally requires correction. Well, this is what the Supreme Court said. To paraphrase them, parameters of sedition require interpretation. In those words, the top judges in Supreme Court said that they will put on hold Andhra Pradesh's entire case, where there is a case being filed against 2 channels based on sedition, asserting that it's time to define limits of sedition. Ambit and parameters of these provisions related to sedition offences would require interpretation, particularly in the context of rights of the electronic and print media to communicate news, even, it went on to say, if it's against the regime in the country.
The top court today said it's time Supreme Court defines sedition. Sedition is words or acts intended to encourage people to act against the government, which has often been misused by the governments to muzzle the press and freedom of speech. The court said this while granting relief to 2 Telugu channels who had been booked by the Andhra Pradesh government.
2 Telugu news channels were booked for sedition by the Jagan Mohan Reddy government after they showed a rebel MP's speech attacking the Chief Minister's handling of the pandemic. Accepting the arguments that sedition charges on news channels will have chilling effect on the freedom of speech, the court said Andhra Pradesh government's filing sedition cases against news channels is muffling the media. It is time this court defines sedition. We are of the view that provisions require interpretation, particularly on the issue of rights of press and free speech, even those that may be critical of the prevailing regime in any part of the nation.
What is needed now is a provision for a prior sanction before proceedings are initiated against the fourth estate, both print and the visual media. The other three organs of state have measures to protect themselves, but the fourth estate is very often left to fend for themselves after the damage is done.
A new database suggests surge in sedition cases. Over 10,000 people have been charged with sedition in the past 10 years, and over 400 booked for criticizing politicians and the government. But does sedition cases violate Supreme Court guidelines? Well, criticizing the government in strong terms cannot be considered seditious. Casual raising of slogans is also not sedition unless those slogans created law and order problems. In fact, hearing another case on COVID vaccines, the judges referred to these pictures shown on NDTV among others. Justice Chandrachud said there was a picture of body being lifted and thrown into the river. I don't know whether complaint of sedition was filed against the news channel for showing it.
Governments have been using sedition charges against media as a weapon. Now the Telugu channel's plea will strengthen the existing case in which the top court has sought the centre's response on the validity of sedition law on a plea by two journalists. In New Delhi, Arunachalam Vaidyanathan, NDTV.
Let's shift our focus to some political news now, and we'll start with Bengal, where the state's chief secretary, in news for the push and pull the centre and the state have been doing over his responsibilities in transfer, and today in a surprise move, he said that he's hanging his boot. He retires from his position. This meant that he does not need to report to the Modi government anymore, but instead he was immediately after that given in the appointment of the West Bengal government's chief advisor to be reporting directly to the chief minister, meaning he will now continue to work with Mamata Banerjee. Now, the centre, obviously quite uneasy with this round being scored by Mamata Banerjee, is said to file a charge sheet against him as well, and there could be action.
It is very unfortunate, unconstitutional.
A stunning denouement to the tug-of-war between the centre and Bengal over Chief Secretary Alapon Bandyopadhyay. Mamata Banerjee furious, accusing the Prime Minister of using the IAS officer for vendetta against her.
इतना निर्दय, इतना निर्मम, Prime Minister मैंने नहीं देखा, Home Minister मैंने नहीं देखा, जो ममता को खिलाफ में है, इसी के लिए उसको Chief Secretary पर उसको bureaucrats को भी अटैक करने पड़ता है.
The showdown came after the centre's second letter to the Chief Secretary ordering him to report for a new assignment in New Delhi again. The first order had come on 28th May after the controversial Kalaikonda meeting between the PM and CM over Cyclone Yas, to which Mamata Banerjee responded this morning, writing to the Prime Minister saying she could not release the officer, that she had sought and got a 3-month extension for him as he was key to Bengal's fight against COVID.
State government did not agree to relieve him on 31st May 2021 as the purpose for which his extension was given still persists. CM West Bengal has written detailed letter to Prime Minister as to why he cannot be relieved. Our priority is COVID.
Arvind Kejriwal has voiced his criticism against the centre on the matter. So have many former IAS and IPS officers. The BJP says mountain out of a molehill.
Chief Secretary के डेके पाठानो एक्सटेंशन इत्यादि ये संपूर्ण प्रशासनिक सिद्धांत আমাদের পার্টির তরফ থেকে কিছু বলার নেই এটা আইন কানুনের ব্যাপার আছে তার মধ্যেই হচ্ছে
Technically, Alapon Bandyopadhyay has retired. From tomorrow, he has a new job, Chief Advisor to Chief Minister of Bengal for the next 3 years. Can he face legal action? Will his retirement benefits be held up? Can the state face action for refusing to obey the centre's orders? Answers are clouded. But what is clear is this politically fraught retirement of a civil servant will further embitter the equation between Narendra Modi and Mamata Banerjee. With Saurabh Gupta, Mondeepa Banerjee, NDTV.
All right, let's shift our focus to Central Vista now, an extremely controversial building being built in the national capital. And while there was much criticism about it politically, today the Delhi High Court rejected the challenge to stop the project and said that this will continue as it is time-bound. This gave the Union Minister Hardeep Puri to go ahead and held a press conference and said that false narrative was being used against the Central Vista.
13,400 का एक मोदी महल बनाया जा रहा है. अरे भाई साहब, ये फिगर्स कहां से आ रहे हैं? और सेंट्रल विस्टा और सेंट्रल विस्टा एवेन्यू में का उनमें अंतर जो है वो भी नहीं मालूम. The two are being freely interchanged.
The centre today defended the controversial Central Vista construction after the Delhi High Court's go-ahead and fining the petitioner 1 lakh of rupees. The Central Vista project has been criticized by many on various grounds, including the opposition, who feel that the resources that have been used should have been diverted for the COVID pandemic, especially since the centre is only bearing 50% of the cost for the vaccinations.
आज भी अब 3.25 लाख लोग देश में जान गंवा चुके हैं. न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स का आंकड़ा है कि ये सरकार का आंकड़ा झूठा है. उनके अनुसार 42 लाख लोगों ने कोविड में अपनी जान गंवा दी है और आप अपने लिए मोदी महल बना रहे हैं उन सब के बीच में.
कई महीनों से
The Urban Development Minister Hardeep Puri said a false narrative has been portrayed and there will be enough money for vaccines and advance payments have been made till August and there will be enough of vaccines for everyone by December.
20,000 करोड़ का खर्चा आप महामारी के दौरान कर रहे हैं. इस पैसे को आप लगाइए वैक्सीनेशन प्रोग्राम पे. वैक्सीनेशन प्रोग्राम पे भी आई एम क्वाइट हैप्पी टू आंसर क्वेश्चन. 35,000 करोड़ केंद्रीय सरकार ने वैक्सीनेशन प्लान के लिए एलोकेट किया है.
Considering the pandemic has taken its toll on the Central Vista project, there will be delays for the new Prime Minister's office and the Vice President's house, and the entire project is slated to be completed by 2025. Sunil Prabhu, NDTV.
First it was Delhi, then the centre, then states like Assam, and now Madhya Pradesh has also announced monetary benefits to COVID victims who have lost their lives, even children who have been orphaned in the process. But while these announcements sound great on paper, the real question is, how will it actually land up in the hands of those who need it the most? In this next report, Anurag Dwari points out how in Madhya Pradesh, death certificates are now not seeing COVID deaths, and thus these are the people who will end up not getting any compensation.
16-year-old Hanushish lost both his parents to COVID in April this year. His father, an LIC agent, and his mother, an assistant professor at a government college in Betul, died within a few days of each other. Hanushish also tested positive. After he recovered, he did the rounds of the Bhopal Municipal Corporation for a death certificate. But the certificate he has received does not mention that his parents died due to COVID. Hanushish has no proof and no means to access the government help promised to children like him, orphans of the pandemic.
हॉस्पिटल के द्वारा हमें जो सर्टिफिकेट मिला उसमें हमें कोविड पॉजिटिव बताया गया. सरकार हमें जो सामान्य मृत्यु प्रमाण पत्र दिया है उसमें साइड में ये लिख दे कि वो जो पेशेंट की मृत्यु हुई है उनका कोरोना से निधन हुआ है, ताकि जो सरकार की योजना है उसका मेरे को लाभ मिल सके.
The government has promised to help orphans like Hanushish. 1 lakh rupees in compensation for next of kin of COVID victims. 5 lakh rupees to government servants' families who died due to COVID. A government job in lieu of the family member who has died. And for orphans, 5,000 rupees per month and free schooling and ration.
ऐसे परिवारों को 5,000 रुपया प्रति माह पेंशन दी जाएगी, ताकि बच्चों को जीवन यापन के लिए परेशान ना होना पड़े. ऐसे सभी बच्चों के शिक्षा का निःशुल्क प्रबंध किया जाएगा. पात्रता ना होने के बावजूद भी ऐसे परिवार को फ्री राशन दिया जाएगा.
According to official figures from the 1st of March, 8,019 people have died due to COVID, but in Bhopal alone. Till the 15th of May, 4,065 deaths have been reported, perhaps an indication of COVID deaths not being added in the total tally.
Unending problems because of the COVID-19 pandemic, from getting admitted to a hospital to medicines in Madhya Pradesh. Families who lost their nearer and dearer ones because of the COVID-19 pandemic are facing difficulties in even getting the death certificates. In Bhopal, with camera person Rizwan Khan and Anurag Dwari for NDTV.
Welcome back, and Mumbai is all set to now get into unlock mode. These are the latest coming in from the civic body there, where they've decided that all essential shops will now remain open from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. Non-essential stores will be open on a day-wise basis. Stores on right side of the road to be open on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and stores on the left side of the road to be open on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Non-essential stores to remain closed on weekends as well. So an odd and even sort of formula being struck by the BMC. And then some news coming in from the WHO, where they've decided a new nomenclature for the variants. Now, gone are the days when you would be referring to variants found in India or UK, etc. Now they all have a new name. They'll be called Alpha or Beta or Gamma or Delta. COVID variants first found in India will be referred to as Delta variant of the COVID virus. WHO has announced this labeling of the COVID variants in a bid to disassociate from the naming after locations. All of these now will have Greek alphabets. Well, that's all we could pack in this edition. Stay tuned. News continues here on NDTV.